That's the last piece cut.
Perfect. We are making excellent time on this project.
I agree. The weather is too nice to be working slowly.
The gentle morning sunlight filtered softly through the trees in front of the small wooden house nestled in the peaceful countryside. Birds chirped cheerfully in the fresh, crystal-clear air of the early morning. Toan woke up very early. He stood in the yard, gazing at the empty space inside the newly renovated room, and smiled quietly. Today was a special day. It was the day he and Ly Tu Diem would begin building their wedding bed with their own hands. A bed not only meant for sleeping, but a place where a hopeful married life would begin. After a simple breakfast, Toan and Ly Tu Diem went to a woodwork shop near their home. They visited several shops and spent nearly 3 days before finally finding the perfect type of wood. The pine planks still carried the fresh scent of newly cut timber. Toan gently ran his hand across the smooth surface and said, "I want this bed to be strong enough, so one day we can tell our children that their parents built it with their own hands." Ly Tu Diem laughed softly, her eyes shining with happiness. She helped him choose each of the finest wooden planks. Under the sunlight, every pale grain of wood seemed to glow. Each piece carried the dream of their future home. Toan carefully began measuring every dimension. He used a pencil to mark each cutting line with precision. Ly Tu Diem sat beside him, writing down every measurement in a small notebook. The sound of the saw echoed steadily through the yard. The scent of fresh wood filled the air. Drops of sweat slowly rolled down Toan's forehead. Ly Tu Diem gently wiped them away with a soft cloth. That moment was both simple and deeply sweet. No luxury, just the happiness of building a future together. By midday, beneath the soft sunlight spreading across the small yard, the first wooden planks had finally been assembled into the shape of a bed frame. Toan knelt on one knee on the ground, holding an old but sturdy hammer. He carefully aligned every corner of the wood before driving each nail in slowly and firmly. The steady sound of the hammer echoed through the peaceful space, like the heartbeat of hope growing inside both of them. Ly Tu Diem stood on either side of the frame, using her small hands to hold it firmly so Toan could secure it more easily. From time to time, she tilted her head and smiled at him. "You're really good at this." Toan looked up, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and smiled gently. "I have to make it strong, so one day it can even handle our children jumping on it." Hearing that, Ly Tu Diem burst into laughter, her cheeks turning slightly pink. The air around them was filled with laughter and simple joy. Every strike of the hammer was more than just work. It was love, effort, and a shared dream for their future. Inside the little countryside home, the wedding bed slowly took shape, just like their dream of a warm family life becoming reality. By noon, as they began assembling the frame, Toan drove in the first nail. The sharp sound of the hammer rang out. The two of them worked enthusiastically, laughing and teasing each other happily. As evening approached, the sky suddenly darkened. Dark clouds rolled in quickly. Toan hurried to finish attaching the final wooden plank so he could bring everything inside before the rain. But unfortunately, something went wrong. Because one plank was slightly misaligned, the hammer suddenly slipped. Clack! A painful cry broke the silence. The nail struck and scraped deeply across Toan's finger. Blood immediately began to seep out. Ly Tu Diem rushed toward him in panic. "Toan, your hand is bleeding!" Ly Tu Diem quickly grabbed a clean cloth and wrapped it around his injured finger. Her eyes were filled with worry. "Maybe we should stop and rest." But Toan only smiled softly. "It's okay. It's just a small wound. I don't want to fall behind." Seeing his hand trembling slightly from the pain, her heart tightened. Later, the two of them hurriedly covered the bed with a large tarp to protect it from the heavy rain. Still feeling uneasy as the storm grew stronger, Ly Tu Diem quickly ran to the neighbors to ask for help carrying the bed frame inside the house. That evening, under the warm yellow light, Ly Tu Diem looked at Toan's injured hand, her heart aching. She spoke softly. "You don't have to push yourself this hard." Toan looked at her with gentle eyes. "I want this bed to be the very first place where our life together begins." His words made her eyes turn red with emotion. The next morning, the bed frame was finally completed. The wooden planks were joined tightly and securely. Toan gently ran his hand over the surface and smiled with satisfaction. That afternoon, the room was filled with the scent of fresh wood and newly applied varnish. Ly Tu Diem carefully brushed each coat of paint with steady hands. The afternoon sunlight reflected off the polished wood, making the bed look warm and beautiful. At the headboard, Toan carefully carved a small heart into the wood. Underneath it, he added the words, "Toan Hearts, Ly Tu Diem." When she saw it, she covered her mouth in surprise, her eyes sparkling with emotion. This was not just a bed, it was a gift filled with all his love and sacrifice. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight gently slipped through the window, the bed finally revealed its full beauty. The frame stood strong and perfectly aligned. The light varnish reflected the golden morning sun, giving the wood a warm amber glow. Toan stepped back a few paces to admire their work, his face filled with satisfaction after all the effort and pain. At the headboard, the small carved heart stood as a symbol of his love. Ly Tu Diem stepped closer and gently touched it. Her fingertips slowly traced every line. Her eyes glowed with happiness. "This bed is even more beautiful than I ever imagined." The two of them stood silently, gazing at the finished bed. Toan held her hand. "This is where we will begin our family." Tears shimmered in Ly Tu Diem's eyes. That night, she carefully took out the white bedsheet she had been saving for so long and gently spread it across the mattress. Toan stood beside her, helping smooth every wrinkle. When everything was done, they stood still, looking at the wedding bed in the middle of the small room. The warm yellow light filled the space with hope. The room remained wrapped in a soft golden glow, as if even the light itself wished to bless their beginning. Toan gently lifted Ly Tu Diem's hand and pressed it close to his chest. His voice was low and warm. "From tomorrow on, no matter what happens, we will face it together." Her eyes glistened, and a quiet smile slowly appeared on her lips. She looked at the wedding bed once more, the bed they had built with their own hands, every plank carrying their effort, every nail holding their dreams. It was more than just a bed. It was the symbol of a love that had endured hardship and still bloomed beautifully. In that small room, surrounded by warmth and hope, the future no longer felt distant. It was right there before them, waiting for the first light of dawn to begin their forever. The final night before the wedding was unusually quiet. Light softly filtered through the window, covering the new bed in a gentle silver glow. The white sheets, the neatly placed pillows, and the little heart carved into the headboard made the room feel warmer and more intimate than ever before. Toan sat quietly beside Ly Tu Diem and gently held her hand, his touch filled with warmth and reassurance. "Tomorrow, we will truly become a family," he whispered softly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was not empty, but instead filled with love, memories, and the quiet excitement of the future waiting ahead. Ly Tu Diem slowly rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing and feeling a deep sense of peace in her heart. Outside, the soft sound of crickets blended with the cool night breeze drifting through the open window, making the moment feel even more peaceful and unforgettable. Her eyes slowly turned toward the bed they had built together with their own hands. Every piece of wood, every nail, and every small detail carried the story of their love, their struggles, and the sacrifices they had made together. A few tears quietly shimmered in her eyes as she smiled softly. Toan gently tightened his hand around hers and said in a calm, loving voice, "From tomorrow on, no matter what happens, we will face everything together." Hearing those words, she smiled through her tears, her heart overflowing with happiness. Beneath the soft moonlight, inside their little wooden house filled with warmth and love, the night felt like a beautiful promise. Tomorrow would not only be their wedding day, but also the first page of the life they had always dreamed of building together. At last, the wedding day arrived. Soft morning sunlight filled the little wooden house. The wedding bed stood neatly in the center of the room, covered with pure white sheets that Ly Tu Diem had prepared days earlier. Simple white flowers and delicate ribbons decorated the room. There was no luxury, no expensive decorations, but everything carried the mark of their love. Every plank of wood, every nail, every sanded surface, and even the small bandage still wrapped around Toan's hand. Ly Tu Diem looked at the bed, her eyes slowly filling with tears. She gently touched the carved heart. Every mark on the wood was proof of the nights they stayed awake together, the worries they shared, and the hardships they overcame. She turned to Toan, her voice trembling. "I will never forget these days." Toan smiled softly and held her hand. "This bed is not just a wedding gift. It is my promise that no matter how difficult life becomes, I will always stay by your side and build this home with you." Tears quietly rolled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from happiness. Because true happiness is not found in luxury. It is found in having someone willing to struggle, sacrifice, and build a future with you by hand and by heart. That was their true beginning.